My name is Eleanor Winters, and at 67 years old, I never expected to hear my son call me a burden. After Howard died 20 years ago, I worked 2 jobs to raise Richard and Catherine alone. I scrimped and saved, eventually buying a beautiful house that I planned to gift Richard for his wedding. Then came that reception, when my golden boy stood before 200 guests and called me nothing but a burden. The silence that followed was deafening. The decision I made afterward changed everything between us. Before I share my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss these real-life lessons from someone who's lived long enough to learn them the hard way. Howard and I met when we were both 22, fresh out of college with nothing but dreams and student loans. We married in a simple ceremony at my parents' backyard in Springfield, with just 30 guests and a cake my mother baked herself. Howard worked as an accountant at a small firm while I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment for the first 3 years, saving every penny for a down payment on a modest starter home. Richard came along in our 4th year of marriage. I can still remember holding him for the first time 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with Howard's striking blue eyes and a full head of dark hair. From the moment he was born, Richard became the center of our universe. I took 6 months off teaching to care for him, stretching our budget to the breaking point, but it was worth every moment. Catherine arrived 3 years later, a quieter baby with my auburn hair and thoughtful disposition. Our family felt complete, and we settled into the rhythm of raising 2 children while building our careers. Howard eventually started his own accounting practice, working long hours but always making time for family dinners and weekend outings to the park. Then came that terrible Tuesday in April 20 years ago. Howard had complained of indigestion that morning but insisted on going to work. By lunchtime, I received the call that would shatter our lives. He had collapsed at his desk. Massive heart attack, they said. Dead before the ambulance arrived. Just like that, at 47 years old, Howard was gone, leaving me alone with 12-year-old Richard and 9-year-old Catherine. The first year after Howard's death remains a blur in my memory. I remember sitting at our kitchen table late into the night, surrounded by bills and insurance paperwork, wondering how I would keep our family afloat. Howard had some life insurance but not nearly enough to sustain us long-term. Our mortgage still had 20 years of payments, and college funds for the children were barely started. I threw myself into working. Teaching during the day wasn't enough, so I took on bookkeeping for local businesses in the evenings, utilizing the accounting skills Howard had taught me over the years. My mother moved in temporarily to help with the children while I worked. Some nights I returned home after the kids were already asleep, leaving notes on their pillows that I would read to them over breakfast. Richard took his father's death particularly hard. As the man of the house at 12, he became fiercely protective of me and Catherine. He excelled at everything: straight A's in school, captain of the baseball team by freshman year, student council president. I never missed a game or school event, rearranging my schedule, and sometimes going without sleep to ensure I was there cheering him on. Catherine was different, more independent, requiring less of my attention. She found solace in books and art, creating her own world while Richard commanded the spotlight. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but I often took Catherine's self-sufficiency for granted, focusing more energy on Richard's achievements and needs. It wasn't intentional favoritism, but looking back, that's exactly what it was. When Richard was accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic but terrified about covering the remaining tuition. I picked up weekend shifts at a local bookstore and took out a second mortgage on our home. Catherine, watching me stretch myself thin for her brother's education, chose to attend the state university on a full academic scholarship. I was proud of her practicality but didn't fully appreciate her sacrifice at the time. Richard thrived in college, majoring in finance and graduating with honors. He landed a prestigious position at an investment firm in Chicago, climbing the corporate ladder with remarkable speed. His salary soon eclipsed what I'd earned in my best years of teaching. When he called to tell me he'd met someone special, Melinda Harrison, daughter of real estate developer Bradley Harrison, I was thrilled for him. The photos he sent showed a beautiful couple, Richard with his father's confident smile and Melinda with her perfect blonde hair and polished appearance. Meanwhile, Catherine had met Daniel, a kind high school history teacher. They married in a simple ceremony that Richard barely made time to attend, citing work commitments. Within 3 years, they blessed me with 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jacob. I spent as much time as possible with Catherine's family, babysitting the children while Catherine worked part-time as a librarian. At 65, I finally retired from teaching after 40 years in the classroom. My pension, combined with Howard's Social Security and my modest savings, provided enough for a comfortable but frugal retirement. I'd never been one for luxury, pouring most of my resources into my children's futures rather than my own. What I wanted most was to see Richard settled in a good home with the family I hoped he would start. Melinda came from wealth, but Richard had always been adamant about making his own way. "I don't want handouts," he would say, a principle I'd raised him with. Little did I know how this value would twist and warp in the years to come. The idea came to me during a Sunday drive through Lakewood Heights, an upscale neighborhood I'd always admired but never imagined living in. A beautiful colonial with a wraparound porch and mature oak trees had just been listed. On impulse, I asked my realtor friend Lisa to show me the property, expecting it to be far beyond my means. The house was everything I dreamed of for Richard: 4 bedrooms, a chef's kitchen, a backyard perfect for children to play in, and excellent schools nearby. When Lisa mentioned the price, I initially laughed. It would require nearly all of my retirement savings for the down payment, plus I'd need to work part-time to manage the mortgage payments until I could gift it. "Eleanor, this is your retirement," Lisa cautioned. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I thought of Richard and Melinda. Imagine grandchildren running through those rooms, family gatherings on that beautiful porch. "My retirement is seeing my son happy," I replied. For the next 6 months, I worked as a substitute teacher and continued my bookkeeping for 2 loyal clients, funneling every extra dollar toward the house. I lived on a strict budget: no new clothes, basic groceries, minimal heat in winter. The mortgage approval was a nail-biter due to my age and retired status, but my excellent credit history and substantial down payment finally convinced the bank. When Richard called to announce his engagement to Melinda, I could barely contain my excitement. The timing seemed perfect. They would marry in June, and I would present them with the house deed at their reception. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I exclaimed. "Have you set a date?" "June 15th, Richard replied. "Melinda's parents are handling most of the arrangements. It'll be at the Grand Meridian Hotel." The Grand Meridian was the most expensive venue in the city, but I kept my surprise to myself. "I'd love to help with anything you need," I offered. "Thanks, Mom, but Mrs. Harrison has it under control. She's hired the best wedding planner in Chicago." That conversation set the tone for the months of wedding preparation that followed. Melinda's mother, Vivian Harrison, took complete control, organizing an extravagant affair that would host over 200 guests. My offers to help with invitations, flowers, or traditional family elements were politely but firmly declined. "Mrs. Harrison thinks hand-addressed invitations are outdated," Richard explained when I suggested continuing the tradition my mother had done for my wedding. "They're using a custom calligrapher." I noticed Richard becoming increasingly distant as the wedding approached. Our Sunday phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Twice he canceled dinner plans at the last minute, citing work emergencies. When we did speak, he seemed distracted, our conversations revolving around the Harrisons' wedding plans and Richard's busy schedule. During one of our rare dinners together 2 months before the wedding, I asked about Melinda. "She's stressed about the wedding," Richard said. "Her mother has very specific ideas about everything." "And what about your ideas?" I asked gently. Richard shrugged. "Honestly, Mom, I'm just focused on work right now. Whatever makes Melinda happy is fine with me." I spent my evenings working on a handmade quilt for the couple, incorporating fabrics from Howard's old shirts and meaningful moments from Richard's childhood. Each stitch represented a memory, a labor of love that took hundreds of hours to complete. 1 week before the wedding, I invited Richard for coffee, eager to share my surprise about the house. We met at a cafe near his office, Richard checking his watch repeatedly as I tried to engage him in conversation. Finally, I pulled out a small envelope. "I wanted to give you your wedding gift privately," I said, sliding it across the table. Richard opened it, his expression confused as he examined the house key and address. "What's this?" "It's a house, sweetheart, in Lakewood Heights. I bought it for you and Melinda as your wedding gift." I expected shock, tears, perhaps a hug. Instead, Richard frowned slightly. Lakewood Heights? That's a 40-minute commute to my office. It's a beautiful neighborhood, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. Excellent schools for when you have children. Richard pocketed the key without enthusiasm. Thanks, Mom. That's generous. Melinda's parents are giving us a 3-week honeymoon in Bali and the Maldives. First class everything. The conversation shifted to final wedding details, my gift barely acknowledged. As we parted, Richard gave me a quick, distracted hug. See you at the rehearsal dinner, Mom. The day before the wedding, I arrived at the Grand Meridian with my carefully wrapped quilt, hoping to deliver it to the bridal suite. A wedding planner I'd never met intercepted me in the lobby. Mrs. Winters? The rehearsal dinner begins at 7. You're a bit early. I just wanted to drop off a gift for Richard and Melinda, I explained. She looked at the bulky package skeptically. I can add it to the gift table for tomorrow. It's a quilt I made. I was hoping to explain its significance to them. They're extremely busy right now with final preparations, she replied, taking the package from my hands. I'll make sure they receive it. I left feeling hollow, wondering if Richard would even unwrap the quilt, much less understand the memories stitched into its fabric. As I drove home to prepare for the rehearsal dinner, I pushed aside my hurt feelings. Tomorrow was Richard's day, and nothing would spoil it, certainly not his oversensitive mother. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I had my hair done at the local salon, splurging on professional styling for the first time in years. My navy blue dress purchased on sale months earlier was simple but elegant, adorned with a pearl necklace Howard had given me on our 10th anniversary. I arrived at the Grand Meridian an hour before the ceremony, navigating through the flurry of last-minute preparations. The ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, cascading white orchids, crystal chandeliers, and ice sculptures catching the light. It must have cost more than my house, I thought, but quickly pushed away the uncharitable observation. Mrs. Winters, an usher approached me. Your seat is this way. I followed him, expecting to be seated in the front row with family. Instead, he led me to the second row, behind where the Harrisons and Catherine's family were being placed. I said nothing, smoothing my dress as I sat alone. Catherine arrived moments later with Daniel and the children, giving me a warm hug before being escorted to their seats in the first row. The ceremony was beautiful, if impersonal. No mention was made of Howard or any family traditions. Richard looked handsome in his tuxedo, but I barely recognized the perfectly coiffed bride as the same Melinda who had once shown me pictures of her college softball team. Everything felt choreographed for maximum visual impact, as if designed for a magazine spread, rather than a meaningful life milestone. At the reception, I discovered I had been seated at a table far from the wedding party, alongside distant Harrison relatives and Richard's former college roommates. Catherine shot me a concerned look from her table, which was closer to the front but still not with the immediate family. Brandon, Richard's best man and oldest friend, gave a heartfelt toast recounting their 20-year friendship. Richard has always been the most loyal, determined person I know, he said, raising his glass. Melinda, you've got yourself a good man. When Richard stood for his speech, my heart swelled with pride despite the day's disappointments. My son, so handsome and accomplished, now married and starting his own family. I want to thank everyone for coming today, Richard began, his voice confident. Melinda, you've made me the happiest man alive. He continued with a 2-minute tribute to his bride, then turned to her parents, Bradley and Vivian. Thank you for raising such an incredible daughter. And thank you for this spectacular wedding, the honeymoon, and all your guidance. I couldn't ask for better in-laws. Richard thanked his groomsmen individually, mentioned Catherine and her family briefly, then raised his glass for a final toast. My hands grew cold as I realized he had made no mention of me whatsoever, not a word about the mother who had raised him alone, who had worked multiple jobs to put him through college, who had purchased a house for him at the expense of her own retirement. As glasses clinked and the band began to play, Evelyn, my neighbor who had been seated at my table, leaned toward Richard as he passed by. Richard dear, I think you forgot to mention your mother in your speech, she said kindly. The music was loud, but not loud enough to drown out Richard's response. "Oh, Mom," he replied with a dismissive wave. "She's just been a burden lately with all her old-fashioned ideas and neediness. Always calling, always wanting to be involved. Honestly, it's been exhausting dealing with her during the wedding planning." The words hit me like a physical blow. The conversations around our table stopped abruptly. Evelyn's face registered shock, then pity. My cheeks burned as I realized others had heard as well, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and discomfort. A burden. That's how my son saw me. Not as the woman who had sacrificed everything for him, but as a burden to be tolerated. 20 years of working myself to exhaustion, of putting his needs before my own, of loving him unconditionally reduced to an inconvenience during his wedding planning. My hands trembled so badly that water sloshed from my glass onto the pristine white tablecloth. Memories flashed through my mind. Rocking Richard through ear infections at 3 a.m., helping him with science fair projects, working overtime to pay for his baseball camp, driving 8 hours to move him into his college dorm, listening to his work problems and relationship advice for hours on the phone. A burden. I barely noticed Catherine approaching until she knelt beside my chair. "Mom," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed around the humiliation. "I heard what he said," Catherine continued, squeezing my hand. "He's being a complete jerk. Do you want to leave? I'll go with you." I shook my head, not wanting to create a scene. "I'll be fine," I managed. "Just need some air." But as I watched Richard laughing with the Harrisons, not once glancing in my direction, a cold certainty settled in my chest. I would not, in fact, be fine. Something fundamental had broken between us, something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I waited 30 minutes, long enough to be polite, but before the cake cutting, then gathered my purse and slipped out through a side door. No one noticed except Catherine, who followed me to the lobby. "Mom, please don't drive upset," she pleaded. "I'm not upset, dear," I lied, kissing her cheek. "Just tired. Give Richard and Melinda my best wishes." The drive home passed in a blur of tears and disbelief. The house, my house, not Richard's now, was dark and silent when I arrived. I kicked off my shoes, still in my fancy dress, and sat at my kitchen table. On the counter sat the elegantly wrapped envelope containing the house deed and keys, which I had planned to present during the reception. For the first time in 20 years, I allowed myself to weep without restraint for everything I had lost: Howard, my youth, my retirement security, and now it seemed my son's love and respect. A burden. The word echoed in my mind as I cried myself to sleep. Morning brought no relief from the previous night's humiliation. I woke still wearing my navy dress, now wrinkled beyond repair, much like my relationship with Richard. My eyes were swollen from crying, my head pounding with the worst headache I'd experienced since Howard's funeral. The house deed sat on my nightstand where I'd placed it before finally crawling into bed. I picked it up, running my fingers over the embossed legal paper that represented nearly all my life savings. The beautiful colonial in Lakewood Heights, 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, mature oak trees, and excellent schools was still mine. Richard's casual cruelty had prevented the transfer of ownership. My phone showed several missed calls from Catherine but none from Richard. I called Catherine back immediately, not wanting her to worry. "Mom, I've been so concerned," she answered. "Are you all right?" "I'm still processing everything," I admitted. "Did I cause a scene by leaving early?" "No one from Richard's side even noticed," Catherine said bitterly. "Daniel and I left right after the cake cutting. I couldn't stand watching Richard play the perfect son-in-law to the Harrisons while treating his own mother that way." "Did you speak to him about what he said?" "I tried," Catherine sighed. "He claimed you misunderstood, that he was just stressed from the wedding pressure. No real apology, just excuses." "I see." The disappointment was crushing but not surprising. "Mom, what he said was inexcusable. You've never been a burden, you've been our rock. Richard has changed since he started dating Melinda. Or maybe he's just showing who he truly is now." After we hung up, I sat with the deed in my hands, uncertain what to do. Part of me wanted to proceed with the gift as planned, to be the bigger person, to show unconditional love despite Richard's behavior. But another part, a part that had been silenced for too long, whispered that I deserved better. That perhaps enabling Richard's entitlement wasn't truly loving him at all. I placed the deed back in its envelope and locked it in my desk drawer. I would make no hasty decisions. Richard and Melinda would be honeymooning for 3 weeks, giving me time to think. But the days that followed brought no clarity, only deepening depression. I lost my appetite, picking at simple meals before pushing them aside. I let calls from friends go to voicemail, unable to explain what had happened without breaking down. I spent hours staring at family photographs, trying to pinpoint when my sweet, protective boy had transformed into a man who could dismiss his mother so callously. A week after the wedding, my sister Margaret drove up from Columbus, alarmed by my uncharacteristic silence. "Eleanor Winters," she announced, letting herself in with her spare key. "You're not answering your phone, and Catherine says you're not eating. What's going on?" I broke down and told her everything: the house purchase, the wedding snubs, and finally Richard's devastating comment. Margaret listened in growing outrage. "And after all that, you're still considering giving him the house? Eleanor, that boy needs a reality check, not another handout." "He's my son, Maggie," I said weakly. "And you're my sister," she countered. "I watched you work yourself half to death raising those kids after Howard died. Richard has become entitled and ungrateful. Catherine appreciates everything you've done. Why pour more resources into the child who doesn't?" Her words stung because they contained truth I wasn't ready to face. We spent the weekend together, Margaret cooking my favorite meals and gently encouraging me to consider my own needs for once. "What would Howard say?" she asked as she prepared to leave. "Would he want you giving away your security to someone who called you a burden?" I knew the answer. Howard had always been generous but firm on matters of respect. "Actions have consequences," was one of his favorite sayings. He wouldn't want me enabling disrespect, even from our beloved son. 2 weeks after the wedding, Richard finally called. No apology, no acknowledgement of his hurtful words. Instead, he launched straight into practical matters. "Mom, Melinda and I were thinking we'd move into the house the weekend after we return. Her parents' wedding gift was fantastic, but we've spent most of our savings on furniture we've been storing. When can we get the keys?" I sat in stunned silence, the entitlement in his tone so blatant it took my breath away. "Mom? Are you there?" "Yes, Richard," I replied carefully. "We need to discuss the house situation in person when you return." "What's there to discuss? Melinda's already talking to contractors about knocking down the wall between the kitchen and dining room. The house is pretty dated, we'll need to modernize quite a bit." Dated? The beautiful home I'd stretched myself thin to purchase, that I'd imagined would be perfect for their family, was dated and needed modernizing before they'd even seen it. In that moment, clarity arrived with the force of revelation. This was not about the house at all, but about respect, gratitude, and the values I had apparently failed to instill in my son. By continuing to give without expectation of basic courtesy, I was enabling behavior that would ultimately harm Richard more than help him. "Richard," I interrupted his renovation plans, "I'll speak with you when you return. Enjoy the rest of your honeymoon." I hung up before he could respond. That afternoon I called Lisa. "I need to list the house for sale," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "As soon as possible." "Are you sure, Eleanor?" Lisa asked, clearly surprised. "What about Richard's wedding gift?" "Plans have changed," I replied. "Richard and Melinda will be making their own way, as young couples should." For the first time since the wedding, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The decision, once made, felt right not just for me, but ultimately for Richard too. Lisa wasted no time in preparing the Lakewood Heights property for sale. "The market is hot right now," she explained as we sat at my kitchen table reviewing paperwork. "Inventory is low, especially in desirable neighborhoods like this one." "What should I do to prepare it?" I asked, having never sold property before. "That's the beauty of this situation, nothing," Lisa replied. "The house is already in excellent condition, and empty homes show better anyway. Buyers can imagine their own furniture in the space." We scheduled professional photos for the following day, and by the weekend, a tasteful for sale sign stood in the front yard. Lisa had priced it slightly above market value, confident that the neighborhood's reputation and the home's condition would attract multiple offers. Meanwhile, Richard continued calling every few days, leaving increasingly frustrated voicemails when I didn't answer. I wasn't intentionally avoiding him, But neither was I ready for another conversation where he talked about modernizing my investment without a word of gratitude. Catherine, on the other hand, had become my rock. She visited frequently, sometimes bringing Emma and Jacob for overnight stays that filled my quiet house with laughter. During one such visit, she helped me begin the process of decluttering something I'd put off for years. "Mom, what's in all these boxes in the spare bedroom?" she asked one afternoon. "Oh, mostly keepsakes from when you and Richard were growing up," I explained. "School projects, artwork, report cards." We spent hours sorting through memories: Catherine's watercolor paintings from 3rd grade, Richard's baseball trophies, handmade Mother's Day cards from both children. I set aside a box of Richard's special items, unsure whether to offer them to him or continue storing them myself. "He should have these," Catherine said, noticing my hesitation. "Whatever's happening between you two now, these are still his memories." For days after listing the house, Lisa called with exciting news. "Eleanor, we have 3 offers, all above asking price. One couple is offering $10,000 over all cash, with a flexible closing date." The speed and amount stunned me. "That's wonderful," I managed. "I'll email you the offers to review, but I recommend the cash offer. They can close in as little as 2 weeks if you're ready." I accepted the cash offer that evening, setting in motion a process that would officially sever my connection to the house I'd never even spent a night in. The proceeds would restore my retirement savings, and then some financial security I hadn't expected at this stage of life. The day after I accepted the offer, Richard returned from his honeymoon. He didn't call first, simply showed up at my door on a Tuesday afternoon, his expression a mix of irritation and confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" "I drove by the house today and saw a for sale sign, and it says sale pending. There must be some mistake." I took a deep breath, gesturing for him to come inside. "There's no mistake, Richard. I've decided to sell the house." His face flushed with anger. "What do you mean you're selling it? You said it was our wedding gift." "I considered giving it to you," I corrected gently. "But I've changed my mind. You can't do that. Melinda and I have been planning our whole future around that house." "Richard, please sit down," I said, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. "I think we need to have an honest conversation." He remained standing, arms crossed defensively. "This is about the wedding, isn't it? You're being spiteful because you felt left out." "This isn't spite, Richard. At your wedding reception, you called me a burden in front of my friends and neighbors. You said dealing with me during wedding planning was exhausting. I was stressed. It was my wedding day." He protested. "You can't punish me for one comment made under pressure." "This isn't punishment," I replied steadily. "It's a consequence. That one comment revealed how you truly see me as a burden rather than your mother, who has sacrificed everything for you since your father died." Richard's expression shifted from anger to manipulation, a tactic I recognized from his childhood. "Mom, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. You know I appreciate everything you've done. We've been under so much pressure with the wedding and work." "Richard," I interrupted, "I've already accepted an offer on the house. The decision is made." His facade cracked. "So that's it? You're choosing money over your own son's happiness." The accusation stung, but I held firm. "No, I'm choosing to respect myself. And truthfully, I think working for what you want will bring you more happiness in the long run than having it handed to you." "Catherine put you up to this, didn't she?" he demanded. "She's always been jealous of our relationship." I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. "Your sister has nothing to do with this decision. It's mine alone." "Fine," he snapped, moving toward the door. "If that's how you want it, don't expect to be part of our lives going forward. No visits, no grandchildren, nothing." The threat landed like a physical blow, but I refused to let him see how deeply it hurt. "That would be your choice, Richard, as this is mine." After he stormed out, I sat heavily on the couch, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. But the alternative, rewarding Richard's behavior with a house worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, seemed equally wrong. For the first time in decades, I had prioritized my own well-being over Richard's demands. The unfamiliarity of it left me shaking. The house closing proceeded smoothly, completing in just 15 days. The proceeds were deposited directly into my account, providing financial security I hadn't experienced since Howard was alive. With Lisa's help, I began looking for a new place for myself, something smaller, more manageable, and closer to Catherine's family. I found the perfect condo in a pleasant community just 10 minutes from Catherine's home. It featured 2 bedrooms, a small patio garden, and a community pool where Emma and Jacob could swim during visits. The price was reasonable enough that even after purchasing it outright, I had substantial savings remaining. Moving day arrived 3 weeks after Richard's confrontation. He hadn't contacted me since, though Catherine reported he had called her several times, alternating between anger and attempts to enlist her as an ally against me. Catherine, Daniel, and the children helped with the move, making the process almost enjoyable despite the underlying sadness. As we unpacked boxes in my new kitchen, Catherine paused. "Mom, are you having any regrets?" I considered the question carefully. About selling the house? No. About the situation with Richard? Every day. "He'll come around," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Maybe," I replied. "But whether he does or not, I know I made the right decision. For both of us." That evening, after Catherine's family had gone home, I sat on my new patio with a cup of tea, watching the sunset over unfamiliar trees. The condo was smaller than my previous home, but already felt more like mine than the old house ever had. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of optimism about the future, my future, whatever it might hold. Value others. Eleanor's growth. The first month in my new condo passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. I explored my new neighborhood, finding a charming library within walking distance, and a coffee shop where the owner quickly learned my name and usual order. The community had an active senior center that offered everything from yoga classes to book clubs, and after some hesitation, I signed up for a watercolor painting course, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. Catherine and her family visited every Sunday for dinner, filling my new space with the chaos and joy that only grandchildren can bring. Emma, at 8, appointed herself my official gardening assistant, helping me plant flowers in the patio containers. 6-year-old Jacob discovered the condo community had an excellent playground, ensuring that each visit included at least an hour of "Watch Me, Grandma," as he mastered the monkey bars. Richard remained conspicuously absent. Catherine occasionally mentioned speaking with him but respected my wishes not to discuss the details. I kept his box of childhood mementos in my spare bedroom closet, neither displaying them nor disposing of them, much like my feelings for my son, stored away but not forgotten. 6 weeks after moving, I met Gerald at a community center painting class. A widower in his early 70s with kind eyes and a quick laugh, he approached me after class to compliment my beginner's attempt at a sunset landscape. "You have a good eye for color," he said. My late wife was an artist. She always said talent was less important than having the courage to put paint on canvas. We fell into an easy conversation that continued over coffee, discovering we had both lost spouses we adored and had adult children who lived nearby. Gerald had been a civil engineer before retirement, had 2 daughters and 5 grandchildren, and shared my love of classic movies and mystery novels. His gentle manner and complete lack of pretension were refreshing after years of navigating Richard's increasing status consciousness. Meanwhile, I joined a travel group that planned day trips to nearby attractions and weekend excursions to neighboring states. I discovered a passion for photography, documenting these adventures with the smartphone Catherine had insisted on upgrading for me. I also began volunteering at the library's children's reading hour, finding unexpected joy in performing silly voices for picture books to enthralled preschoolers. 8 weeks after moving, I received a text message from Richard. "Can we talk? In person?" I stared at my phone, heart racing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to protect the fragile new happiness I'd been building. Another part, the mother who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years, longed for reconciliation. After careful consideration, I replied, "Sunday afternoon at Capital Coffee downtown, 2 p.m. Richard arrived 15 minutes late, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in casual clothes rather than his usual impeccable business attire. He scanned the coffee shop anxiously before spotting me at a corner table. "Mom," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "You look different." I had recently had my hair styled in a shorter, more modern cut, and wore a bright blue blouse. Catherine had helped me select small changes that reflected my evolving sense of self. "Thank you," I replied, unsure if he meant it as a compliment. "How are you and Melinda settling in?" He grimaced. "That's partly why I wanted to talk. We found a place, but it's not what we hoped for." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. Richard fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Look, Mom, I wanted to apologize for what I said at the wedding. It was horrible and untrue. You've never been a burden. You've been the most supportive mother anyone could ask for." The apology sounded rehearsed but not insincere. I nodded, acknowledging his words. "Thank you for saying that. I was under a lot of pressure," he continued. "Melinda's parents have these expectations, and I was trying to impress them, and somehow that translated into treating the person who's always been there for me like garbage." He paused. "I'm truly sorry." "What specific expectations?" I asked, curious about the dynamics that had contributed to his behavior. Richard sighed. "They come from old money, Mom. They have a certain way of doing things, certain expectations about how their daughter should live. Melinda grew up with household staff in summer homes. The pressure to provide that kind of lifestyle. That sounds challenging," I acknowledged. "But Richard, that doesn't explain or excuse how you treated me." "I know," he admitted, looking down. "I got caught up in trying to be the person they wanted as a son-in-law. I lost sight of who I really am, who you raised me to be." We sat in silence for a moment, the background noise of the coffee shop filling the space between us. "How's the new place?" I finally asked. "It's an apartment near my office. Nice enough, but small. Melinda's struggling with the adjustment. We had planned our future around that house in Lakewood Heights." He hesitated. "Mom, I hate to ask this, but is there any chance you could help us with a loan for a down payment? Just to get us started. I'd pay you back with interest." And there it was, the true purpose of the apology and reconciliation attempt. I felt a familiar disappointment settle in my chest. "Richard, I'm not in a position to offer loans," I said gently but firmly. "My resources are allocated to my own retirement security now." His expression hardened. "You mean the money from selling the house that was supposed to be our gift?" "Yes, that money is now securing my future. I've purchased my condo outright and invested the rest. So after one mistake, you've completely cut me off financially? That seems excessive, Mom." "It's not about cutting you off," I explained. "It's about recognizing that you and Melinda are capable adults with good incomes. You don't need my financial assistance, you want it. There's a difference." "Melinda's parents offered to help," Richard countered. "But I turned them down because I didn't want to be indebted to them. I thought I could count on my own mother." "Perhaps that's a boundary you need to reconsider," I suggested. "Accepting help from Melinda's family doesn't make you less of a provider, if the alternative is struggling unnecessarily." Richard looked genuinely conflicted. "I wanted to do this on my own." "Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered," I said, thinking of how Howard and I had initially resisted his parents' offer to help with our first home's down payment, only to gratefully accept it later. "Richard, I can offer you advice, emotional support, and love, but not financial bailouts." "Not anymore." He nodded slowly, processing my words. "I understand. I don't agree, but I understand." We parted with an awkward hug and a tentative plan to have dinner together with Melinda in a few weeks. I walked home with mixed emotions: relief that communication had been reopened, disappointment that money had been a motivating factor, but hope that perhaps this boundary setting was the first step toward a healthier relationship. Over the next several months, Richard and I rebuilt our relationship in small, careful steps. He and Melinda eventually accepted assistance from her parents for a house down payment, not in Lakewood Heights, but in a pleasant neighborhood closer to their offices. Our monthly dinners became a cautious tradition, sometimes tense but gradually more relaxing as we established new patterns of interaction. Meanwhile, my friendship with Gerald blossomed into a gentle romance that took us both by surprise. Our first official date was to an outdoor concert in the park, where we sat on a blanket like teenagers, sharing a picnic and holding hands under the stars. At 67, I had never expected to experience the flutter of new love again. Yet here it was, different from my passionate young love with Howard, but sweet and sustaining in its own way. Catherine was delighted by this development. "Mom, you're absolutely glowing," she observed after meeting Gerald for the first time. "He looks at you like you're a miracle." "Don't be silly," I protested, blushing despite myself. "I'm serious," she insisted. "After everything with Dad, then Richard's behavior, seeing you happy like this." Her eyes welled with tears. "It's what you deserve." With Gerald's encouragement, I expanded my horizons further. We took a weekend trip to New England to see the fall foliage, my first vacation in over a decade. We joined a ballroom dancing class, laughing through our clumsy attempts at the waltz and foxtrot. We volunteered together at a local food pantry, finding shared purpose in service to others. Richard observed these changes with visible confusion during our infrequent interactions. "You're different, Mom," he commented during one dinner at his new home. "More, I don't know, independent." "I've always been independent," I corrected him. "I'm just prioritizing my own happiness now. It's an adjustment for both of us." As autumn turned to winter, I received a surprising invitation from Richard and Melinda to join them for Thanksgiving dinner along with Catherine's family, and, to my astonishment, Gerald. "We'd like to host everyone this year," Richard explained during our monthly dinner. "A fresh start for our family traditions." I was touched by the gesture but worried about including Gerald in what might be a tense family gathering. "Are you sure?" I asked. "We're still getting to know each other." Richard seemed genuine in his response. "Mom, you've included Gerald in your life. That makes him important to us too." The Thanksgiving dinner wasn't perfect. Melinda clearly felt the pressure of hosting both families, and Richard hovered anxiously, trying too hard to ensure everyone's comfort. But watching my son carve the turkey in his dining room, seeing Catherine's children playing with their cousins, feeling Gerald's reassuring presence beside me, I felt a profound gratitude that had nothing to do with houses or money or status. Later that evening, as Gerald drove me home, he asked, "Are you happy with how things are working out with Richard?" I considered the question carefully.
I'm cautiously optimistic.
We're finding a new way to relate to each other, one with clearer boundaries, and I hope more genuine respect. "He's lucky to have you," Gerald said, squeezing my hand. "A mother who loves him enough to teach him difficult lessons, even at this stage of life." His words settled something in me, a lingering doubt about whether I had done the right thing. In choosing to value myself, I had ultimately given Richard a more valuable gift than any house: the chance to develop greater empathy, responsibility, and authentic connection. Looking out at the winter stars, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever the future held with Richard, I had found my own path forward, one filled with new friendships, experiences, and possibilities I never could have imagined when I stood humiliated at that wedding reception just months before. 6 months after the wedding that had so dramatically altered my relationship with Richard, my new life had taken on a comfortable rhythm. My condo felt truly like home, decorated with a mix of treasured possessions from my previous house and new items that reflected my evolving tastes. The patio garden flourished under my attentive care, providing a peaceful retreat for morning coffee and evening contemplation. My relationship with Gerald had deepened into a steady companionship that brought joy to my daily life. We maintained our separate residences but spent most evenings together, cooking dinner, watching old movies, or simply talking for hours. At our age, we felt no pressure to rush or define what we shared. It was enough to enjoy each other's company and support. Catherine and her family remained my most frequent visitors, with Emma and Jacob claiming my spare bedroom as their room at Grandma's. Daniel had started bringing his high school history essays for me to proofread, rekindling my love of teaching in a small but meaningful way. Richard and I had established a fragile peace. Our monthly dinners continued, sometimes at his home, sometimes at local restaurants. We carefully avoided certain topics: the house in Lakewood Heights, money in general, and the wedding incident specifically. Instead, we focused on safer subjects: his work projects, local news, and occasional reminiscences about Howard or Richard's childhood. One Saturday morning in May, my phone rang with Richard's number, unusual, as he typically texted rather than called. "Mom," he began without preamble, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I was wondering if we could meet for coffee today. Just the two of us. There's something I need to talk to you about." We arranged to meet at our usual coffee shop at noon. I arrived early, anxiety gnawing at my stomach. Had something happened with Melinda? Was he ill? The possibilities spiraled in my mind until Richard arrived, looking nervous but healthy. "Thanks for meeting me on short notice," he said, setting down his coffee cup. "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything that happened, and I realize we've never really talked it through completely." I nodded cautiously. "We've been rebuilding slowly." "Too slowly," he admitted, and without addressing the fundamental issue. He took a deep breath. "Mom, I was horrible to you. Not just at the wedding but for years before that. I took you for granted, expected you to drop everything for me, and then had the audacity to call you a burden when you were literally buying me a house." The frankness of his self-assessment surprised me. "What brought this on?" "Therapy," he said with a wry smile. "Melinda and I have been having some adjustment issues in our marriage. Our counselor helped me see patterns in how I treat people I care about. It wasn't pretty." "I see," I said, touched that he would share something so personal. "The thing is," Richard continued, "I've been thinking about why I behaved that way, especially toward you. And I realized it goes back to when Dad died." My heart constricted at the mention of Howard, as it still did even after 20 years. "When he died," Richard explained, "I was 12, old enough to understand what happened but too young to process it properly. I watched you work yourself to exhaustion for Catherine and me, and part of me, a very young, scared part, resented you for it." "Resented me?" I echoed, confused. "Not for working hard," he clarified. "For making me feel like I had to be perfect to justify your sacrifices. Every time you skipped meals to pay for my baseball camp, every time you worked overnight to afford my college applications, it created this impossible standard. I felt like I owed you a level of success that could never be enough." I sat back, stunned. I had never considered that my sacrifices might have created a burden of expectation. "When I met Melinda and her family," Richard continued, "they represented this different world, one where people had things without struggling, where worth wasn't tied to sacrifice. I wanted that world so badly that I started to see your love with all its visible effort and sacrifice as an uncomfortable reminder of where I came from." Tears welled in my eyes. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know," he said gently. "You were doing your absolute best in an impossible situation. The problem wasn't your sacrifices, it was my inability to accept them gracefully, to understand that love isn't a debt to be repaid." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 20 years of misunderstanding between us. "That's why the house became such a flashpoint," he finally said. "It wasn't just a house, it was the culmination of a lifetime of you, giving up your needs for mine. And instead of being grateful, I resented the obligation it represented. And now," I asked quietly, "now I'm trying to understand that your love doesn't come with strings attached, that I don't have to earn it or repay it, just receive it and be thankful." He reached across the table for my hand.
I am so sorry, Mom.
"Not just for what I said at the wedding, but for years of taking you for granted." For the first time since that terrible wedding reception, I felt the knot of hurt in my chest begin to loosen. "Thank you for telling me this, Richard. It helps me understand too. There's something else," he added. "I need to apologize for trying to manipulate you into giving us money for a down payment. That was shameful." "We all make mistakes," I said. "The thing is," he continued, "Melinda and I are actually doing fine now. Her parents helped with the down payment, and I've come to terms with accepting their help. Our house isn't as big as the one in Lakewood Heights, but it's ours and we're making it a home." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "Actually," Richard hesitated, "we're hoping to start a family soon. Melinda is. Well, we just found out she's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother again." Joy surged through me. "Oh, Richard, that's wonderful news. We want you to be part of our child's life, Mom. A real part, not just occasional visits. If you're willing." "Of course I am," I assured him, squeezing his hand. "Nothing would make me happier." As we parted that day, something fundamental had shifted between us. The reconciliation wasn't instantaneous or complete. Real healing rarely is. But the honest conversation opened a door that had been firmly closed since the wedding. Over the following months, our relationship continued to evolve. Richard and Melinda began joining Catherine's family for Sunday dinners at my condo once a month. Richard started calling weekly just to check in, our conversations growing more natural and less guarded. When Melinda's morning sickness became severe, I brought over homemade soup and crackers, a simple gesture she accepted with genuine gratitude. Meanwhile, my relationship with Gerald continued to flourish. We took our first extended trip together, a 2-week tour of the national parks I'd always wanted to visit. Among the majestic sequoias and breathtaking canyons, Gerald proposed not marriage but partnership. At our age, he said, I don't think we need formal ceremonies. But I want you to know that I'm committed to you, Eleanor, to building whatever time we have left together. I accepted with a joy I never expected to feel again at 67. With the proceeds from selling the Lakewood Heights house, I established education funds for Catherine's children and the baby Richard and Melinda were expecting. It felt right to direct some of those resources toward my grandchildren's futures while maintaining enough security for my own needs. 1 year after the wedding that had so deeply wounded me, Richard hosted a family dinner at his home. Catherine and Daniel came with their children. Gerald attended as my partner. Melinda, now visibly pregnant, had softened considerably toward me, even asking for advice about the nursery. After dinner, as we all gathered in the living room, Richard raised his glass in a toast. To family, he said, and to second chances. Mom, a year ago I hurt you terribly with thoughtless words I can never fully take back. Today, I want to publicly acknowledge the incredible mother you've always been and thank you for having the courage to let me face the consequences of my actions. Tears welled in my eyes as everyone raised their glasses. The house you were going to give us would have been a wonderful gift, Richard continued. But what you gave me instead was far more valuable, the chance to recognize my own entitlement and grow beyond it. I'm trying to become the kind of person who deserves your love, not because I've earned it, but because I appreciate it. Later that evening, as Gerald drove us home, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the humiliation of being called a burden to the peace of creating boundaries to the joy of genuine reconciliation, each step had been necessary for healing. You know what amazes me? I said to Gerald as we walked hand in hand to my condo. A year ago, I thought selling that house was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Now I realize it was actually the easiest because for the first time, I was choosing myself. And look where that choice led you, Gerald replied, gesturing to the cozy home I'd created, the garden I'd nurtured, the new life I'd built. That night, lying awake beside Gerald's sleeping form, I thought about the lessons of the past year. I had learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. That sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our children is to let them experience the natural consequences of their actions. That it's never too late to discover new passions, forge new connections, or stand up for your own worth. Most importantly, I had learned that being a good mother doesn't mean being a doormat. It means modeling self-respect alongside sacrifice, teaching your children through your actions that love should never diminish the giver. As I drifted toward sleep, I felt profoundly grateful not for what I had lost, but for what I had found in its place. A more authentic relationship with my son, deeper appreciation from both my children, new love with Gerald, and most surprisingly, a stronger version of myself I never knew existed. What about you, my friends? Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that ultimately led to unexpected blessings? Have you found the courage to establish boundaries with loved ones who took you for granted? Share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Remember, it's never too late to teach people how to treat you, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give our loved ones is the opportunity to become better versions of themselves. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to value yourself as much as you